Dennis, those who would seek to explain religion without God normally point to an analysis of our belief systems, which is generally hierarchically structured. The biology of belief, our temporal lobes with errant neuronal firings, the psychology of how we operate, our group sociology, what's called memes, and how these viruses of the mind propagate. You're in a very interesting position to comment on this, not only as a scientist and a believer, but a neuroscientist and someone who has worked with viruses as an immunologist. How do you look at the belief systems and the argument against religion, arguing from this hierarchy belief systems?
Well, let's just take up this whole metaphor of the meme. I think it's a sort of interesting metaphor that people have brought into the discussion. And any metaphor has to have some kind of linkage with reality in order to make sense. So we have to think maybe a little bit about how viruses infect cells. Now, we work on the white blood cells called T cells that defend our bodies against viruses, we hope. And when they get infected with a virus, virus has to get entry into the cell. There has to be a receptor on the surface of that cell which will allow the virus in. And that's how HIV comes into T cells, for example. And then it takes residence inside the DNA of that particular cell. So we know a lot about, how viruses get into cells and how they put their DNA right into the genome and that kind of thing. Okay, so now we have the question, is the meme, a good analogy for that kind of process as a sort of virus infecting the mind? And actually, E.O. Wilson introduced the terminology of cultogens much earlier than Richard Dawkins, who then introduced the term meme, which has sort of taken a life of its own, actually. And Dan Dennett has a whole appendix on memes in his book, Breaking the Spell. So there's a lot of interest there in making the meme analogy work. Now, I have to say that if people end up having to write appendices of books to defend a metaphor which they want to use in science, I think they've already failed. And the reason is that metaphors in science immediately get taken up by the scientific community. If they have a use, then they get taken up, they get used. Like a black hole is a kind of metaphor, but it has a reality. We know that there are black holes. They have real properties and so forth. So we have to ask the question, what do memes apply to? What is a meme? It's supposed to be a kind of unit of cultural inheritance of some kind that can be passed laterally between people, that can be kind of passed down as sort of Lamarckian evolution, that kind of thing, So the question is, what work does it do? What useful work does it do in the lab? If we don't use the terminology of memes, does it matter? Does it make any difference? And my argument would be it makes no difference at all, because memes don't exist. There are no such things as memes, because this metaphor has no substrate. It doesn't really... We know what genes are. They have a substrate. They have a bit of DNA. They have a sequence that gives the word gene a meaning. In a sense, the word gene is a bit of a metaphor, actually. But it has a substrate. It has a bit of DNA that actually has information in it. Memes don't have a substrate.
One could argue that its substrate is like the substrate of a mathematical equation. Maybe it's a Platonic object, that it exists when it's created, and it becomes this form that exists as the collective creation of mankind. And I don't think they even use it as metaphor. I think they use it as reality, that these things really exist, but maybe in a different form.
Well, Dan Dennett uses the analogy that, gives examples of memes, and one of them is wearing a baseball hat backwards, if I remember rightly. And I've never been tempted to wear my baseball hat backwards, especially as a Brit, but the point is that, you don't need, meme language doesn't really help you to understand why cultural practices spread through communities, for example, like wearing hats in a certain way. Meme doesn't add anything to the theory. That's the point, I think. It doesn't do any work that enables us to do experiments, that enables us to test it, or to find out if they actually exist or not. So if it's a Platonic idea, then it's certainly not testable by the processes of science, And so I think, speaking as a biologist, I'm always looking for metaphors that do work in the lab. If you want to understand the brain, then you need metaphors that are going to help you to understand the brain better. And I just don't think memes do that kind of work, because anyway, we don't actually absorb ideas, especially complex ideas, as a sort of viral invasion of our brains. And actually, somebody has likened memes to kind of medieval ideas of demonology. In medieval times, people used to keep the window closed. They were afraid if they had the window open, this terrible sort of, demon would come in and affect their brain, and do terrible things to them without them knowing. And when you read some of this sort of language the anti-kind of religious rhetoric of the mimologists, you almost have a feeling these are the medieval demons, that are coming, going to infect my brain without my knowing about it. But in reality, we have beliefs which we have to justify, we have to think about, we have to give reasons for, we have to rationalize about. And that's why I think the meme sort of rhetoric doesn't work very well for me, actually.
How about at the biological level, and what seems to be some good evidence that the temporal lobe of our brains has a predisposition to create feelings of transcendence, or some people with epileptic seizures there can see visions and believe they're part of some cosmic consciousness. Do you see some biological basis for religious belief?
Well, I think all of our beliefs, whenever we think about them or rationalize about them, they have neural correlates. There are things happening in the brain when we have those beliefs. The same happens when we brush our teeth in the morning. We have neural correlates. I feel guilty if I don't brush my teeth, because my mother taught me to do that after every meal. When I do that, there are neural correlates. Now, actually, brushing our teeth is a well-justified belief. It's something that people ought to do, and there are good reasons for doing that. So the fact that there are neural correlates for beliefs doesn't really tell us, actually, about whether they're justifiable beliefs or not. Now, we know that our brains can deceive us, but we also know the kind of circumstances under which that might happen. For example, in a very emotional revival meeting or something like that, you could understand in a highly emotional atmosphere that people could be deceived about something. And that's a concern. That's something that we should understand and be aware of. But I think to extrapolate from that and say, well, religious beliefs are nothing but, our frontal lobes doing various things, is simply is a misunderstanding, I think, of what's going on, because everything we do, everything we think has neural correlates. Something's going on in our brains, I hope, when we're doing everything, There's no magic, spooky stuff going on there, And when we're thinking about atheism, let's say if we're getting emotional as an atheist and we're supporting our beliefs as an atheist, lots of things are going on in our brains.
Maybe the same place.
Maybe the same place. So to me, it doesn't, it's interesting. I love studying the brain, and you can do brain imaging and so forth. But actually, it doesn't tell us very much about whether religious beliefs or any beliefs are justified, or political beliefs for that matter. So you can't really detect, a conservative, a Republican or Democrat by doing brain imaging, at the moment anyway.
I would feel very uncomfortable when people who would purport to defend belief in God would point to some research like this and say, see, God made our brains to be receptive to religious beliefs. That is, I think, equally dangerous on the other side.
Absolutely. I think all these kind of arguments, should be treated with great suspicion, actually. And just because the brain works in a certain way or not, is really not an argument for some of these big meta-scientific kind of questions or metaphysical questions. They have to be addressed on other grounds. They don't tell us what the answers are at the end of the day.
So you would see, though, religious beliefs as fulfilling psychological and sociological group needs.
Oh, yes. And indeed, yes.
And
yes,
so the question, the dispute is, does religion go beyond that? Is it founded on some fundamental reality?
Yes.
Or is it just simply the social and psychological reinforcement of the positive feedback that one gets by having these beliefs or being reinforced by the group?
Yeah, we are social animals. And, when a bunch of skeptics and atheists get together to listen to a well-known speaker supporting their atheism, they'll have a group cohesion, they'll feel good about it. They go away with their beliefs supported. They feel happier, probably, that there is no God and their atheism has been kind of nurtured in this group activity. And when people go to a football match, they get nurtured in their enthusiasm for football, or whatever it might be. And when people go to church, clearly the same processes are going on. So I think in any social activity, you encourage group cohesion, you encourage lots of group loyalty, and all those kind of processes are going on. But at the end of the day, none of that tells us about the true status of what's being done. You can argue football's a waste of time. And all these people are deluded to go along and waste their time and their money on that sort of thing. And some people, do that. They think. So in other words, every human activity or human belief has to be justified in some way on other grounds. And the fact that it has certain psychological consequences. You can argue the toss, that could be used as an argument to support almost anything, if you like, or not. So,
this problem is becoming more serious in the internet age because it is that much easier for people with certain belief systems, whatever they are, to seek out people of their own persuasion and be reinforced in that thinking. And therefore, that thinking becomes more solidified, indeed ossified, through the internet and getting that limited feedback. So I think the problem of belief systems is being enhanced in today's world without a sense of, are those belief systems of whatever kind related to some fundamental truth?
I think that's right. And I think one way of addressing that is to encourage people in an open society to go deliberately to conferences and lectures and all that kind of thing, where they're going to listen to people with beliefs very different from their own. And I love going to listen to atheists. I listen to them all the time. I go to their lectures and listen to what they have to say, and I'm interested, and they have some good points, and I hope that they would do the same with theists and other people and so forth. So we have, in an open society, this free exchange of ideas, and I think that's terribly important. And I think what I worry is when, for example, a church community looks like a clone, where everybody wears the same clothes and they look the same and, and all that kind of thing. And I would be very worried if that was the case. And I'm very happy to say my own church in Cambridge is very diverse, and we have just the whole range of people there from all kinds of backgrounds. And I find that quite encouraging. I think it's the way it should be, and whatever group ends up looking like a clone, I'm always kind of worried about that. And so I think it's important for people deliberately to go out, listen to other people, let their beliefs be challenged, read books which are presenting beliefs opposite to their own. I think that healthy debate should be going on the whole time. And actually, the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion, which I've recently started up in Cambridge, we do just that. So we have courses where we invite people to come in, any belief or none, it doesn't matter. And we have a course on science religion from various angles, and that's what we encourage, is sort of open debate. And I think that's what we should be doing.
I think that's terrific. Unfortunately, that is becoming more and more rare in the world as different groups become more solidified in their own belief and isolated from each other.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm very happy. I used to live over in the Muslim world for many years. I was teaching there in a couple of universities, so I have a lot of good Muslim friends, and we have good discussions, and there's lots of Muslims in academia and others in other contexts who are just very open to debate and discussion and to have a friendly exchange of ideas about all kinds of things. And I think that should be encouraged. That's where society is missing out by becoming polarized. And that's why I think the kind of polarized aspects of the science-religion debate are unhelpful, because often they're just trying to score points rather than really trying to exchange ideas. And I think it's the ideas that are important.
On the other hand, I like the fact that the debate about religion is in the scientific world now, even if it is a bit rancorous at times, because I'd rather have the debate in the science-religion arena than in the religion-religion arena.
Right, I think that's certainly true. Yes, it makes it much more interesting, actually. Yes, and somebody said that Richard
Dawkins... And a chance for rationality.
Well, that's right.
Not a guarantee, but a chance.
True. Actually, somebody said that Richard Dawkins is God's great gift to the church in the early part of the 21st century. And, I think there's a truth in that, that this shows that the UK is not such a secular society as we thought, actually. Because to me, a secular society is one where you get silence about God in the public domain. Religion is privatized. But what Dawkins is doing is bringing the debate out into the media and the public domain and into science and religion. And this is great. I'm all for it,